Excellent. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Lifting the Lid, our free monthly webinar series where we lift the lid on strategic communication excellence. My name is Sia Papageorgiou, and I'm the Director of the Centre for Strategic Communication Excellence. I'm based in Melbourne, Australia, but wherever you are today, I hope you and your loved ones are safe and well. Today, I am so pleased to introduce to you one of the true gems in our profession, London-based values and ethics expert, Jane Mitchell, who has gotten up really early this morning to talk to us about how communication professionals can demonstrate their value in a world turned upside down. Jane is one of our global faculty members here at the Centre, and when she's not helping us build professional communication excellence, she's supporting companies like Rolls-Royce, BAE Systems, BP, Tesco and Airbus to embed values and ethics through connecting cultural dots and building cultures of integrity. She's a long-time IABCer, having served on local, regional and international boards, and she's the current chair of IABC's World Conference Program Advisory Committee. Welcome, Jane, and thanks once again for getting up so early to speak with us today. How are you this morning?
Yeah, good. Thank you, Sia. We have had sun up until now, but you know, it's it's not sunny today. But hello, everybody. Really delighted to be here.
Thanks again. So just before we begin, one item of housekeeping, and I have a question for our participants as well. Firstly, there will be time at the end of our chat to answer any questions you have. So please pop them into the chat function and we'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the chat and we'll make sure we address the questions at the end. Secondly, I'd like for our participants to have a think about what's currently getting in the way of you demonstrating your value right now. So use the chat function and just share your thoughts and we'll have a look at those a little later on. So Jane, let's get stuck into it because I have lots of questions for you today. Really pumped about this chat. So communication professionals everywhere have been thrust into the spotlight, okay? We often say we love a crisis as comms pros. It's our chance to shine. It's when they truly need us. Jane, what do you think is our golden opportunity here? Do you think our current landscape of COVID-19 is a wake-up call to our profession?
Well, in conversation with you, Sia, I was struck by your reminder of a keynote speaker that we had in Vancouver when we were all face to face. There was such a time in the world, and hopefully there will be at some other point. Yes. But Peter Sheehan, our keynote speaker, he just encouraged us to think that we need to move from a state of awareness to ownership, and we can't wait to be told what to do. I think it's fair to say that in the last few months, or certainly since the end of last year, and we continue now, communicators have really stepped up in this crisis. Not that they weren't stepping up before, but they've stepped up to the requirements of their organisations and their clients. And I think they have been forced into that position. And they've been forced into the position of leading in a moment when actually all around us we're losing our heads. And communicators, again, were just brilliant at taking stock, taking a deep breath and saying, okay, this is how we need to be communicating. This is how we need to be engaging. This is how we need to keep people connected. And of course, that's not only about messaging and engagement, but it's also managing all the channels that we've had. So I think that our expectations have shifted. I think we are brilliant at jumping into crisis to really respond and help our organisations weather these storms. But I think that we must now think about the fact that the thing that we're fundamentally missing in the world is connection. People are really missing this sense of community, which is why, of course, we have people running around all over the world in lots of countries. Not all, obviously, but lots of people are just desperate to be together. And of course, it's a real danger. So I think that as communicators, we're very good at community building. We need to be thinking about how we can do that. Our organizations need us to be doing that. And I think communicators need to shift their own views of themselves from messenger to listener. And in so doing, then, organizations can be thinking about the fact that communicators are not there just to transmit messages. They are there as a key part of the strategic leadership of the organisation moving forward. So I think it's about shifting from the short term, let's get through this, excuse me, let's keep people together, to also the longer term. I'm getting so passionate, I'm choking already. That's not a good start, is it?
Have a drink of water, and then we can. You okay?
Yes, I think something else is, I mean, there was something else that's happened. I think we need, this is an opportunity, a real opportunity to rethink. In that, I think that capitalism has kind of turned itself upside down now. I think the bankers and the investors are not the people who are uppermost in our minds. I think we've got people who previously, whatever we may admit outwardly, I think there was and has been a general kind of acceptance of the fact that we need dispatchers, we need waste collectors, we need delivery men, we need health workers, we need supermarket workers. We need those people to keep us going. We haven't really been consciously aware of them. I think the world is absolutely consciously aware of those frontline workers now. I think that's a real opportunity. But at the same time, I think we need to be mindful of the us and them that might be developing. I think proven to be developing is that people who are working at home, with all of that goes with working at home, and people who are out on the front line, there's a big difference. So I think, again, there's a role for communicators to bind and join people. And I think that in this world of uncertainty, I think communicators can absolutely be right in that space, because frankly, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And I don't say that flippantly.
That's right. Okay, so let's have a look at what people have shared in the chat. Okay, thanks, Lauren. You're the only one. So right now, what's preventing you from demonstrating your value in the organisation? So please feel free to add to this chat. But Lauren says being so bogged down in the do. We had somebody else share with me earlier, leaders not listening. And one of my LinkedIn connections talked about the fact that we are now, because we can't see each other face to face, one of the key ways she demonstrates her value is through relationship building and through that face to face connection. So taking that into consideration, I'm interested, Jane, in your take on what's preventing communication professionals from demonstrating their value right now. Do you think things have really changed?
Do I think things have really changed?
Have changed.
I think things can change. I think that people have been brilliant at jumping into the space to help people. I think there is a natural sense of caring. I do believe that. I think that we fundamentally have a natural sense of caring, so therefore we want people to feel okay. And bear in mind that I do have, as an adjunct to this, is that we do need to care for ourselves as well. That is a given, because obviously we are going through exactly the same thing as everyone else. So it's tough. I think that the only way that we can change, and you will have all heard this before, and it is something of a truism, but it is true. If you want change to happen, you first have to consider how you need to change yourself. So, something that we've been talking at the centre for a long time is the fact that we're still having the conversation about, as communication professionals, we keep hearing it resonating around the world. We want a seat at the table. If you want the seat at the table, you've got to decide what that seat at the table looks like, and you've got to go for it. If there was a time when you can achieve it, it is now. If there is a time when change is acceptable in your organizations, if you feel that that's the blocker, then you use this time, because the time is right now. There's so much change happening, there's so much uncertainty happening, that this is a space that you can jump into. I think that as human beings, we call on our past experience. So therefore we have a bias about what might be happening in our own organizations, and we prevent ourselves in a way, where our own preventative mechanism, when we say, well, I can't do that because I've tried it before. I think that this is the time for us to be courageous and to say now, okay, now I think I probably can try it, and take baby steps if you feel that baby steps are the appropriate thing to do. But people will have learned over the last 5, 6, 7 months as to what you can do, what is acceptable, and what I mean by you can do as in acceptability of the people that you're doing it for.
Yeah.
But I think that also you have to shift your own story. So you have to value yourself first, and then you have to understand that in building value for yourself, you can build value with the organization. That might sound a little bit esoteric, but it does absolutely have to sit with you. And I was thinking about this last week, and I was thinking when we say that we want people to be ethical. So, okay, we're going to put you on an ethical leadership program. Well, immediately you've put people's backs up, because they say, well, we're all ethical. You know, there's no question that we're not ethical. And that's not the point for the program. But it's the same with communicators. Everybody thinks they're a communicator. So you need to shift their narrative from the fact that actually it's not just about you doing what they do all the time, but it's about what you can achieve with your brilliance and your expertise. And I would suggest, you know, use some of the experience of what's happened in the last 6 or 7 months. So it's very much about self-awareness, and don't be afraid to ask for feedback. Quite often, if we're in do mode, to the point that I think it was Lara who was saying, you know, focusing on the now and just the doing. And if you're rushing from one thing to another, it's sometimes it's not an automatic reaction to just take a deep breath and say, okay, how do we think it's going here? Not feedback about what you're doing, your output, but about how you are and how you're doing. It's really important to ask for that feedback.
Absolutely. And Jody, who is based in Singapore, makes a really good point in the chat. She really liked the point about not being limited by own experiences. And I think that's a really good segue into my next question, which is about imposter syndrome. Okay. You know, the fact that, you know, do you think that communication professionals suffer from it, or going back to what you said earlier, is it a matter of courage or lack thereof?
That's a tough one. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, and I wouldn't dream of. All I can do is reflect on my own experience, and it's alive and well in me. That's for sure. I always think I'm going to be found out, and I think that as human beings, I don't think it's to do with us and our profession. I think it's everybody's, you know, sense of self-belief, and I think particularly now, I think we're all going through that. Maybe politicians aren't, but let's not get into that conversation. But because I think they think that they're always right until they do a U-turn and then apologise. Okay, I've got that off my chest now. But I think that I think we do. And I think in a way, it's a good check and balance for us. Not so that it compresses our ability to actually do anything, but that we do, it goes back to what I was saying before about, you know, give yourself some feedback and check in. But I think it is complex for all of us. And also, being a woman, I've often thought it's a woman only thing, but actually many of the men that I admire and love, they also have imposter syndrome to a degree, in the sense that they question what they're doing. And I remember a client saying to me once when I was asking a question, and he said, well, the fact that you're asking me shows that I should be answering the question. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, because you're not 100% sure, you're not being hubristic, and you're not telling me what you know, you just want to find out. And I thought that was a good lesson. But you know, I think we need to turn it to a positive, therefore, is what I'm saying. Yeah. I'm really struck by Joe Biden's new running mate, Kamala Harris. And I have to say, you know, my American friends, and I'm sure that many of you have American friends who are over the moon with the fact that he's chosen someone like her. And I was looking into her when you and I were talking about this imposter syndrome thought, and I thought, I wonder if she's ever had it. And she had it when she was a little girl, according to her website. I haven't met her, but her mother used to say, stop moaning about the things that you're unhappy about and do something about it. So she says, and of course she's you know, she's on a website and explaining her ticket, but she says that it's something that she's always had in her mind, and therefore she hasn't shied away from doing really, really difficult things, and gang trafficking in the US, managing the rights of refugees, holding out for Obamacare and so on. And now, of course, she's Joe Biden's running mate. So she's not someone who ever takes the easy route. Jacinda Ardern was another person who really struck me as being someone who you might think in a world of politicians had imposter syndrome, but she hasn't expressed that. She's been very empathetic. She's very, very compassionate. And she's got her country through in the most extraordinary way. Sorry, Sia, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, I was just saying that's because she's a communication professional.
Well, there you go. But we do have a slide, because there is someone who I think we all know, and I hope that most of you can read this. You think, why should anyone want to see me again in a movie? And I don't know how to act anyway, so why am I doing this? So this is Meryl Streep. So I would be very surprised if there's anyone on the call who hasn't heard of Meryl Streep. So, you know, imposter syndrome is not necessarily a bad thing. We just need to be able to channel it into something that becomes positive and helps us to develop and grow. And, you know, there's an example that strikes me at the moment is digital transformation that we're going through. You know, it's happening. It's happening around us, whether or not we engage with it. It is happening. And at the centre, we've been doing a lot of work with artificial intelligence and communication professionals' uptake of artificial intelligence. And the fact is, it's happening faster than we can uptake. But in the last 7 or 8 months, we've had so many digital channels that we've just had to get used to. And I'll bet you most of us are really pretty good at it now. So, you know, don't underestimate our ability to manage these changes and to embrace them. I think it's really important. And also, the last thing I say is that the World Economic Forum of 2-3 years ago now delivered a really interesting report on skills for the future. And it's very interesting because in the last few months, I've heard a lot of this conversation, which is many of the process and task orientated jobs are going to disappear over time because of digital transformation, AI, etc., etc. Now, that's not a bad thing. What it does mean, however, is that communication professionals can jump into that space, because the top skill that is going to be required is complex problem solving. Now, if there are people who know how to complex problem solve, it's communication professionals, because, you know, the number of times we're given something that just seems unbelievably complex. Please make this really appealing. Please make it visual. Please make it a great story. That's what we do. So we need to really think about the opportunities that we have, not focus on what we've done well in the past, but what we can do really well in the future.
That's right. I just want to go back to what you said earlier about Peter Sheehan as well, because that closing keynote in Vancouver last year really struck a chord for me too. And in addition to saying, you know, we have to move from awareness to ownership, he also said, you know, fear is an opportunity to get excited about the future. And I think this is a real opportunity for communication professionals to look at all the great things they've done over the last, you know, 6-7 months, and just forge ahead and say, right, we know what we're doing, and believe in ourselves. But, you know, a couple of other participants have said, you know, Arun, who's based in Melbourne, yep, I'm a male, and confirmed that we suffer from imposter syndrome too. Yeah. And Michaela says that if I certainly feel imposter syndrome is an issue that doesn't get enough attention. Adrian, I hear you as well. Yeah, so absolutely, we all suffer from it at one point or another. But I think too, what you said earlier about feedback is important. So listening to people that you trust, listening to other people and saying, hey, you know, can I just check in with you? Am I on the right track? Or, you know, do I know what I'm talking about?
And I'd just like to pick up on the fear thing. Fear keeps us sharp. You know, we don't want to go into a fight or flight mode, because we need to be somewhere in the middle. I can't imagine that there are many of us in the last year or so who have not been fearful in some way or shape or form. We've managed it in very different ways. Yeah. But the fact is, it also ratifies that we're alive. Yes. And we learn from these things. You know, it's like learning from our mistakes. We can't achieve much if we just sail through life. Well, oh gosh, it's so difficult not to get involved in politics, but we can't achieve much in life if we just continue to be unfearful of things. It actually makes us less of a human being. So I think that we turn the fear into awareness and understanding. That's the thing.
Yep. Very good points, Jane. Okay, so let's look now at some of those areas where communication professionals can make an impact. And I want to start with purpose, which has become a little bit of a buzzword over the years, in recent years. What is it, and why is it so damn hard to articulate, Jane?
Well, okay, I'm going to bat that right back at you, which I know you weren't expecting me to do. Why do you think it's so difficult to articulate?
Because it's that intangible, how do you touch that intangible piece that, you know why the organisation exists, okay, and that is usually around making money or doing some sort of, you know, something in society. Purpose to me is that sweet spot in the middle where you know, it's the sum of a lot of things, and I just don't, and I've bar a few very well-known brands who can really articulate their purpose. People get, and it's one of those things that it's really difficult, but I think it's one of those areas that communication professionals can really influence.
I absolutely agree. So thank you for indulging me. I know that you weren't expecting me to do that. And what was really interesting about that was that you went straight to the organisation. It was about the organisational purpose. So I don't know how many people who are listening in to us and joining in on our conversation have really gone through their own purpose exercise. I have no idea. But how do you know, and how can you help your organisations explain their purpose if you haven't first done yours? So I think it's really, really brilliant to be able to go through your own purpose exercise, to really establish what it is that you're passionate about, what it is that you're really angry about, turn that into a positive, and what you believe you can do. And I think that helps you to anchor again, not to stick your boots in mud, but it helps to root you. It helps you to understand what your purpose is, and therefore you can use that in order to decide, to be fair, who you want to work with, whether or not you want to be in an organisation. Because if your purpose is something that is entirely contradictory to the purpose of your own organisation, then that's another question. Once you've gone through that, I think it's much easier to be able to help your organisations go through it. And I'll come back to it, but we've got a slide that was just we're going to send these all to you afterwards, but we've got a slide that just shows you an exercise that you can go through. Oh, not that one, the one before, that one. Yes. So if you are clear what you're passionate about, if you know what your talent is, remove imposter syndrome, you know what your talents are. And if you then think about how you can combine your passion and your talents to deliver on something that you're angry about, let's just say you're really angry about the environment, and turn that into a positive. So it could be about ecology or whatever it might be, but don't keep the anger as a negative, turn it into a positive. So how can you turn the anger into a solution? You can then, and the intersecting, and we all love a Venn diagram, in the intersection, find your own purpose. This is, and obviously this is a much bigger exercise, but this was just a snapshot to just show people to have a think about it. And if anybody wants to go through their own purpose exercise, they can talk to me. But it really is getting you to focus on these key things. That's to make it very simple, because it's not a tricky thing to do. It's a really interesting thing to do, and it can take some time, but it doesn't need to be overcomplicated. Thank you for the slide, and we'll let you have that later. But I think that in terms of organizational purpose, I mean, okay, how is this for a purpose? Be the best in the eyes of our customers, employees, and shareholders. You know, I mean, what does that mean? Who wouldn't say that?
Yeah.
Or the company's primary objective is to maximize long-term stockholder value while adhering to the laws of the jurisdictions in which it operates and at all times observing the highest ethical standards. I'm moved, not. You know, really, I mean, if any organizations who believe that this is their purpose, they either need to get their act together or they need somebody else helping them to write it, because it's, yes, exactly, bring me a bucket, somebody said. Precisely. However, if you think about, I'll just give you a couple more. Tesla's purpose is something that is really, really meaningful in the sense that they want to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. Now, you either agree with that or not, but it's absolutely crystal clear that that's Tesla's purpose. Yeah. And I can't think of a time where they haven't done that. I am not talking about their employee engagement record or anything like that, but that's their clear purpose. Disney is creating happiness through magical experiences. We know what that feels like. We understand that. It's something really, really tangible. Nike, to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. If you have a body, you are an athlete. It makes you think, great, I want to get into those Nike shoes. You know, because I do have a body, so therefore I can be an athlete. But it's something that you have to feel. And I would ask people who work in organizations and clients who are asking them to help them with a purpose, how do you think people feel in those organizations? How do you feel about working for them? Because it's something really visceral. And you cannot feel anything about those two earlier ones that I read out. And as somebody said, it all sounds so familiar. It is familiar because it's easy. It's a tick the box thing. And if you haven't got a real sense of purpose, then eventually, and particularly now, I really do believe this, particularly now, where it's come to the fore, you know, what are we all doing? Why are we all doing it?
That's
people are really, really questioning it. And I think that it's really important to understand that there is a renewed sense of purpose for employees now. And there will be an expectation when they come back to their organizations that they want to be working with a purposeful organization. Younger people coming into organizations want to be working with a purposeful organizations, because frankly, if they don't, they'll move on somewhere else. They need to feel as though they're contributing. And if you've got KPIs that are simply about, as you were talking about earlier, about shareholder, stockholder, or numbers and values, then this is an opportunity to move that discussion towards, okay, well, how can we make those, if we have to have KPIs, more purposeful? How can we link those to our values? How can we make our behaviors link to our values and our purpose? And again, that's a sort of also a reverse way of focusing in on whether or not your purpose is really meaningful. But I think people want it. I think that we have got dozens of examples where a misaligned purpose has led to inappropriate behaviors. Wells Fargo is a perfect example. I'll let you all look that story up, but it's a horrific story about a purpose not dissimilar to the first one that I read out to you. And it led to a series of behaviors that was very, very damaging, incredibly costly emotionally and financially. And, you know, the fallout still goes on.
Absolutely. Okay, so before I move on to my next question, which is I just want to look at values a little bit more. But in terms of purpose, Andrea made a point on the chat and said purpose isn't very important for smaller and not-for-profit enterprises. It's almost impossible to usefully identify purpose for larger profit-based corporates. What do you think of that statement, Jane?
Well, Nike, Disney, and Tesla are all profit-based corporates. I think it might be harder. I think that's fair, particularly if they're. I mean, Tesla was a startup. It obviously is no longer, but it started out with its purpose. It was purpose-led. I think that. I mean, there are thousands of books on this. I guess that one of the best And one of the, the tried and tested that most people will know is Good to Great by Jim Collins. And he talks about purpose-led organizations. He makes a comparison between organizations that started out with a purpose and those that started out with a growth ambition, or simply a money ambition. It was just to make lots of money. The ones that survive more over a longer term are those that are purpose-led. The trick is to hold on to that purpose, but also to be realistic about what the purpose is. And it's not, it shouldn't just be BS.
Oh, absolutely.
It is about what the organization is here to do and how we are going to do it. And I think increasingly, let me just relate that to the Sustainable Development Goals, which have been bandied around for quite a while, and by the United Nations Global Compact. But they have now become a part of corporate parlance. Sustainable Development Goals are seen to be really important. And of course, all organizations love to benchmark. And when they're benchmarking against their peers these days, Sustainable Development Goals come up a lot. And I think that if you want to find a way of shifting the conversation in an organization that is dyed in the wool, corporate, been around for a long time, not really caring about purpose, again, it goes back to what I was saying before about shifting the narrative and having a different conversation, but using language that is out there and that is rising in the consciousness of people.
So just going back to a point you said earlier about holding on to your purpose. Okay, how in the current climate, because this is something that a lot of organisations are revisiting right now through this pandemic, and through the Black Lives Matter social movement, and previously with Me Too. How can we make sure that our purpose and our values become part of the company's DNA, so they don't just end up being words on a poster or words that people wear around their necks on a lanyard?
Okay, so this is one of my favourite subjects, obviously. It won't surprise you to hear. But you will get found out. The fact is that people now care. You are open to scrutiny as communication professiononals. When social media came along a few years ago, people said, "Oh yeah, well, we'll manage that when it does its stuff. It's fine. We won't kind of proactively take it on board because we've got too much else to do, but it'll be around." It's taken over. Everybody is a communicator. Everybody cares about having an opinion, and nobody is afraid to share it. So if an organization says one thing and does another, you will be found out. So if you say that you have a set of values and everybody says, "Oh yes, that's marvelous, we want to be associated with that company," and then the next thing you do, let's just say you're a retailer in a fashion brand, and you have a set of values whereby everybody says, "This is amazing, they're going to look after people in their supply chain, they're going to produce natural clothing, we're not going to have disposable clothing," and the next thing we know, it's being sold for 10p, being done by small children in an underdeveloped country, with no light. And people vote with their feet. Boohoo is a perfect example of that. Boohoo is an online retailer. It's not my age group, but it doesn't mean to say I can't know about it. But Boohoo was this amazing fashion retailer, and everybody came along and said, "This is great, they're going to lead the way in, sustainable fashion, da 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 da." It turned out that it was all hypocrisy. And what happened was that they went from the top of the tree right to the bottom. They are in deep trouble because buyers voted with their wallets and they went elsewhere because they said, "Okay, well, that's absolutely fine, but we're not going to be taken for a ride like that." And I heard this great phrase, which was virtue signaling hypocrisy. I love that. So that we are virtuous, we say we are virtuous, and yet we're not going to do it. But if we say it loud enough, you will believe us. That is no longer the case, because everybody has access. Everybody has access to social media in all sorts, from WhatsApp to you know, any kind of social media platform, they will talk about it and people will share it. And we know that. You know, other companies whereby this has happened very, you know, famously in the last few years, organizations like Boeing, VW, I come back to the Wells Fargo because it's a morbidly fascinating example, where there was a real distinction and gap between what they said they were going to do and what was actually happening in the organization. And where a lot of that emerged from was internally. So it wasn't the external impact on a retailer within large corporates. The language and the conversation within the organization signaled very, very clearly that there was something majorly wrong. And for whatever reason, it was being missed. It wasn't being picked up. And I think partly, and I'm not suggesting this, I think it is partly because we don't have somebody in an organization that is seen to be the guardian of purpose. I don't actually think it should be a single person. It should be all of us. So particularly in our role as communication professionals, if we're being asked to whitewash or greenwash something, and we know that something doesn't feel right, and you always know, as somebody who's being asked to articulate the story of the organization in whatever guise it might be, you always know whether or not that feels right. And if it doesn't feel right, what I'd urge you to do is just find a way of questioning it, because there are always indications in organizations that trip over that were long existing in the organization, but there wasn't a sense of psychological safety whereby people could talk up about it. Wells Fargo were doctoring PowerPoint presentations long before, you know, we'd even heard the name Wells Fargo. Yeah. It's a clear sign it was the comms people who were doing it.
That's right. And I think it goes back to what you were saying before about people now care. Okay, communication professionals have always had, you know, a bullshit filter, so to speak. This is you know, a whole new world right now, and as you said, people are looking for greater meaning, and they can see through the crap. So I think, to me, that's a nice way of thinking about it. Yeah. All right. So, what are some of the questions then that communication professionals start by asking when looking to initiate these types of conversations within their organisations?
Well, how do you find out? How do you know how people are feeling? Let's talk. I mean, if I'm talking internal at the moment, internal communications, I mean, how do you know how people are feeling? So if I think about how best to operate within an organization as a consultant, the way that I operate well in an organization is by making friends very quickly. So and what I often find in organizations is that more often than not, and this is not unfamiliar to anybody, of course, are the silos that are alive and well. So everybody's operating in this way. Everybody has their own P&L. They've all got a leader. They've all got a series of managers, and the leader in one department, one function will say, well, you can't do that because no, I don't want you to talk to them because this is about us. I mean, it just goes on and on. You know, it's all just so toxic and silly. And these are organizations, obviously, that I'm in when we're trying to find out what went wrong. And those are some of the things that do go wrong. So I would say that rather than questions, the first thing you need to do is build your network, because then it becomes much easier to ask questions. And I think that once you've got mates and once you've got a common language between you, I think that you are much more powerful than you are as an individual. However painful that might be for you to hear, we are all stronger together. There is no question about that. And the same applies within organizations. The same applies to leaders at the top of the organization. So they also need to be aware that actually working together helps them to deliver a stated purpose, helps them to reinforce the right values and behaviors, but at the same time also helps them to deliver more easily. And the same absolutely applies to communication professionals. So I think, for instance, if you were to be very practical about this, and if we think about the social contracts we were just talking about before, how often are they built into the language of the organization? Because in a way, you can be, as a communication professional, the guardian of the corporate language with the help of obviously the most senior leaders. You can help to capture how they are talking, but that can become very consistent. So find out what that is. That's a really good question to explore. Questions around regulators, not just financial. So if we go back to the Sustainable Development Goals, you know, how is the organization driving towards Sustainable Development Goals? Use the pressures from the outside, bring them inside to develop the conversation, to ask the questions, and to look at things from the perspective of leaders and people that you're trying to influence. In an HR perspective, working with HR, you know, from a people perspective internally, you can think about some of these questions that relate to understanding your people. So, and it goes back to the point you were making, Sia, about caring. How can we best care and show that we care as an organization? Now, lots of organizations have been doing that, particularly during this time, because they felt conscious that they have to do that in order to try and keep people safe. But how can you best care and show that you care? How can you listen to people's concerns? Because now, with the fact that there is still a lot of fear around, here in Europe and in the UK, we've got redundancies every day being announced in the news. People are very fearful of their jobs. But how can you listen, therefore, to people's concerns? I think there's also going to be an element of trauma, people coming back to work. So you need to be asking the questions that people know are safe to answer, so that they feel as though you really do care about the answer. How do we help people in our organisation to continue to perform? Because, you know, the next few months and years are not going to be easy. There's going to be a lot of pressure at the top. There's going to be a lot of pressure on you, whether you're sitting at the top or wherever you're sitting in the organisation. And I think that it's about turning all of that into high performance, but not at any cost. And how can you motivate and inspire people in this really, really disrupted world? These are all skills that if you haven't got already, you're going to have to develop really quickly, because it's going to benefit you and it's certainly going to benefit the organisation.
Absolutely.
So I think going back partly to what we were talking about before, what's the kind of echo chamber that you're operating in yourself? So are you, and just look outside it to see whether or not you do have an echo chamber, because it's really easy in easy times to surround ourselves with great people that we can rely on, that we know will agree with us, that we know will get things done quickly. But this is the time to just examine that echo chamber, because you don't want the echo chamber to be the same as it was before. And I'm not sure that an echo chamber itself is good. You need to actually break down the echo chamber so that you've got different voices, you've got different responses, because that's what life requires now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jane. That's really practical advice and some key questions that we can take back to our organisations and you know, start having those conversations. So I heard a new term recently, anti-fragility.
Yes.
Which is basically where resilience meets grit. So not just bouncing back, it's bouncing back better than before. How can communication professionals use the current crisis, looking back at what you said earlier, let's not waste it, to build our influence and become better than we were before?
I think it partly relates to what we've just been talking about, is to broaden your network and to break down your own echo chamber. But I think also have a look around the organisation. So let's just think about speak up calls to whatever they're called in your organisation, hotlines, whistleblowing lines. I hope they're not called whistleblowing lines, but you know, those sorts of things. So that will require you to make friends, if you haven't already, with somebody who operates in ethics and compliance, or whether it's security or whoever it is. But all of those speak up calls have in them subject headings. So you'll be very clear, you'll get a real good sense of what people are calling about. So that will give you a sense of what's happening in your organisation. In addition, you'll also see the level of anonymity. Now, an organisation that I work with who's based out in the States does hotline calls, has speak up lines. And what's happened during this last few months is that the number of calls has gone up exponentially by about 12%, which is quite a big number. But the level of anonymity has equally risen. So what that demonstrates to me, I mean, it's not unequivocal, obviously, but it is an indication of the fact of this element of fear, or working around people who are not safe to speak up. Now, as we know, if you're not safe to speak up about a problem, you're certainly not going to put your head above the parapet with new ideas. So the two go hand in hand. So it's not just about speaking up about concerns, it's also about generating new ideas. Have a look around at the corporate filters that might get in the way of what happens between stating what you'd like to see at the top of the organization. So this is our purpose, these are our values, these are the behaviors that we want to see, this is the culture that we want to generate, but start to dig into the organization. And I think that it will help you better understand how you can respond to it, but also generate the conversations that are really important in the organization to help try and tackle some of it. And while you're doing that, you'll find some really great stuff that's happening. And that, of course, is something that you also need to capture. But what it does mean, and what I am saying, yes, is that in order to build influence, you need to be more influential with the people around you and feel safe to do that now. I think that, you know, this is, it's something that we're really good at. We're really good at communicating. We're really good at building communities, and actually not a lot of other functions are particularly, even HR, dare I say, because they're very understandably bound by process and system and needing to do things in exactly the right way. With communication, actually, I think it's freer. It's freer for communicators. Use that, because I don't think that linear models in an organization are adequate any longer. We've talked about silo organizations for, you know, since Kingdom Come, for goodness sake. And I think that with the way that organizations are now, I think we do need to be much more matrixed. And I was hoping I was not going to say that, because I've never seen a matrix organization work. But don't put it in a bucket, but make it collaborative, communicative, you know, get it working across the organization. Because whenever we look at culture failure in organizations, and what I mean by culture failure is that people aren't really sure what to do, there isn't a sense of psychological safety, there is no speaking up, it is very often is because people feel very boxed in, and therefore we need to network more. And for communication professionals in organizations, you have the license to create this single rhythm of language across an organization. You can be the person who helps the organization to develop that. And people want real consistency now. They want leadership and they want some consistency. So you can be that reinforcing voice on behalf of the organization, because, you know, through chaos, I am absolutely of the belief that communication professionals can provide clarity. They absolutely can.
Yes. Okay, so we have 9 minutes left, and I know that we've got a couple of questions that have come in, but I just wanted to finish on a couple of points. So you mentioned the types of skills that we need in this new world. Just bearing in mind everything you've already said, are there any other personal qualities and skills that communication professionals might not feel so comfortable for a communication professional, but is really where we need to stretch ourselves to be able to do all those things that you've just talked about, that we need to be, you know, taking the lead on, or can use as opportunities to take the lead on? Is there anything we haven't talked about that you think, we should do to thrive in a post-COVID world?
Yeah, I think we touched on it, but I know we've really discussed it, was effective listening. Yeah. And I think that that applies across the whole organisation. I think communication professionals do quite a lot of that anyway, but I think you need to do more of it. And I think you maybe need to listen to different people.
Yeah.
But also listen to what's not being said as much as what is being said. And when I was working in BP after the Deepwater Horizon tragedy, in the programs that we were running, the CEO said to us, and he said to his leadership team, you need to be mindful to listen to the quietest voice in the room. And I think that's absolutely true. I have to say, it did become a bit excessive where everybody was very quiet and watching it. Anyway, but the sentiment is exactly right. It is listening to the quietest voice in the room, because very often the quietest voice in the room is either not speaking up for a reason, or has something to say but doesn't quite know how to say it and doesn't feel that the environment is right. So that's really, really important. I think look at, something else we've touched on but not really discussed is develop your digital skills. So skills within something like Zoom or beyond, finding ways to make those interactive and use fun. So we tried an experiment with you guys where we introduced you to Jamboard. Many of you may have known Jamboard, but there are lots and lots of tools like Jamboard whereby you can get people to write and post notes as you would in a flip chart if you were in a room. And all of these tools are developing incredibly quickly, and they can make meetings really, really interesting. I grew up in a world of broadcast television, so therefore I'm a great film and video protagonist, and the use of people in film and video is really, really important. I think get your leaders on video, try to get them not to look at the camera, I would suggest, but maybe slightly off, but help them to develop a presence, an online presence that they feel comfortable with. Because it's great to do podcasts and it's great to do audio, but people want to see people, and that includes leaders. I'll just give a very, very quick example of someone who did this and is still doing it as far as I understand it. The CEO of Verizon in the USA, he and his communications team decided at the outset of lockdown that he would do a daily broadcast. So he does it in Vision every day. And the day I heard him speak, which was on a Tuesday, on a Monday morning, he had 90,000 people on the call the previous day, and they could see him. This was right in the heart of lockdown. They could see him. They could see that he cared about them, and they could see the whites of his eyes, and they could see that he was tired. They could see that he was happy, sad, whatever it might be, but he was there sharing. And I think that that's something else.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sia?
I said, and authentic. So it's him in all the glory.
Totally authentic. And I think another skill, and it's part of what communication professionals do, is share experience and tell stories. We haven't talked about storytelling. Storytelling has built communities for thousands and thousands of years. It is how we have built civilizations. It's how we build communities now, and it's how we coalesce communities now. It's how we keep that connection. And I would say storytelling, you've all got that skill, use it. People want to hear stories because it connects us all.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Now we are almost out of time, but we do have a couple of questions. Jane, that was absolutely amazing. I could talk to you all day. But let's just quickly get to some questions. Adrian?
So one of the questions I saw from Andrea was that are we our company's moral conscience? Thinking about us as communication professionals, Jane.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think we have license to be. I'd like to think that we were all in our organizations, and leaders in organizations were creating that sense of psychological safety that is absolutely critical in order for people to feel that they can equally be the moral conscience. I think that there is a real, and again, this is a really good discussion to have between an ethical and a moral conscience, or a values conscience. And I think that because you veer into the realms of philosophy or religious morals, and people get very antsy about it. So I think it's bringing it back to the values of the organization and being the values conscious. So, but the fact is, Andrea, it's such a good question, because the fact is, we're all human beings. We don't want to see people behaving badly to other people. And that's just about doing the right thing. It's just about saying, I'm sorry, but that is not acceptable. And if you've got, and the way that the values and purpose can help people is to be able to say, look, we're using this language, but we're not displaying this. So yes, absolutely. And I think in communication, if we're creating the language, then absolutely, we can just hold it up to people, hold up the mirror and say, look, we're using the language. Should we be changing this? Perhaps we should be changing this on the basis of what we've just observed here. We should be changing this, maybe making it an anti-value. Yeah. You know, but you've got license to be quite creative with those conversations. So yes, but expand.
And one last question probably here is from Michaela, who said, do you think having a good purpose and being purpose-led creates more resilient organizations? And
yes.
Communicators, because they are able to use that purpose to remind them why they are doing what they are doing, particularly, you know, when things don't work out.
Precisely, Michaela, you've nailed it. Absolutely. Yes. And also, if you have a look at, and we've done a slide with some links. Mm-hmm. And one of the links is for the UN Global Compact, and you can expand that into other areas. But also, there's a lot of information around now, which is showing that purpose-led organizations are the ones that are coming out more resilient, that are proving themselves in these really, really uncertain times and difficult times. And therefore, it's a language that you can absolutely use, or proof, evidence is mounting to say that those that are purpose-led are the ones that are surviving / thriving through the last few months. So yes, really, really important. There's a lot of stuff around it available to us now, and I would suggest that you seek that out, because it's definitely there for the taking.
Okay. Excellent, Jane. We're going to have to leave it there because we're 1 minute to the hour. But as Jane mentioned earlier, we will send you these slides sometime tomorrow, along with the recording of today's session. I just wanted to say a massive, massive thank you, Jane, for sharing your insights so generously with us today. That was an amazing conversation. I could keep going, but I'm sure you've got to get on with your day. A very big thank you to everybody on the call as well. Thank you so much for coming today. As I said, we'll send you the pack tomorrow. Our next Lifting the Lid webinar will be held on the 23rd of September at 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, and that's with best-selling author, keynote speaker and global thought leader on the power of connection, Janine Garner. She'll be joining us to talk about reigniting your brilliance. So it follows really well of this conversation about how we can demonstrate our value. This is about reigniting our brilliance. You know, everybody's exhausted, and you know how we can build our energy to do those fantastic things in our organisations. So please get in touch if you have any feedback about today. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much once again, and stay safe and well. Bye for now.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.